In this fortnight's episode, the Unfit to Exist edition, we talk about why the Constitution is useless at protecting gun rights. What's in the news with stories on the shooting in Orlando, e-cig update, prison, TSA, and legalized theft again, and an Ancap App segment on a pretty cool cryptocurrency wallet, Jax.io.
Welcome to The Lava Flow, channeling the flow of information to the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, and agorist community. Find us at thelavaflow.com. Here's your host, Roger Paxton.
Thank you for joining me this week. Coming to you from the state where America's first spaceman, Alan Shepard, was born in Derry, this is the show that will bring you the people, places, and events that everyone in the Liberty Revolution needs to know. You can catch me on Twitter at the Lava Flow Pod. This is episode 39, the Unfit to Exist edition, and it's Tuesday, June 21st, 2016, when there have already been more than 490 people killed by police this year. What's rustling my jimmies this week? You're about to find out. Let's do it to it. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and this text could not be more clear. Although many have tried to convolute the clear meaning by saying that only the militia can have guns. Even if that were the case, which it's not, it is also clear that the founders believe that all of us are the militia. As George Mason said, quote, "I ask, sir, what is the militia? It is the whole people. To disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them." Richard Henry Lee said, quote, "A militia, when properly formed, are in fact the people themselves." Now this is about as clear as it can be. But let's say that those who say that the Second Amendment only preserves the right for the militia to be armed are onto something. We can test it by just replacing a few words in the amendment. Try this for example. A well-schooled electorate, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and read books shall not be infringed. This sentence, structured in exactly the same way as the Second Amendment, makes it much more clear. Does this sentence mean that only the electorate should have access to books? Of course not. It means that in order to make sure that we have a well-schooled electorate, books should be kept and read. Just as to ensure that we have a well-regulated militia, arms should be kept and bared when necessary. But what about the militia being well-regulated? Doesn't this mean that the government should control and regulate the militia pretty heavily? As you're aware, language and meanings of words change over time. As Constitution.org put it, quote, "The phrase well-regulated was in common use long before 1789 and remained so for a century thereafter. It referred to the property of something being in proper working order. Something that was well-regulated was calibrated correctly and functioning as expected. Establishing government oversight of the people's arms was not only not the intent in using the phrase in the Second Amendment, it was precisely to render the government powerless to do so that the founders wrote it." So as we can see, well-regulated meant to keep the militia functional, to keep it regular. So the founders believed that in order to keep the militia functional, the people must retain the right to keep and bear arms. But another argument you might say is, isn't the National Guard the militia? Well, since we've already shown that the founders believed the militia to be all the people, this is clearly not the case. And since the National Guard wasn't formed until 1903, 114 years after the ratification of the Constitution, this is just a ludicrous argument. If you go back and read the House debates on the 1903 Dick Act, which formed the National Guard, it is clear that this was separate from the militia. Some quotes of note. Senator Proctor said, quote, "The National Guard is in full organization. It is already created and would naturally be first called upon if wanted for a limited time, and then the militia would be called upon." Another quote by Senator Proctor. The old law makes every able-bodied man in the country a member of the militia and provides no further organization. This bill separates and makes a class which can be called into active service. And a final quote from Senator Proctor: "The troops provided for in Section 24 are not militia. They are volunteers. They are called the National Volunteer Reserve. They are not called militia." Senator Foraker said, "While this reserve is part of the militia, in the sense that all men are a part of the militia who are between the ages of 18 and 45, it is not a part of the militia in any other sense." And finally, Representative Stark said, quote, "To my mind, our institutions are best served by having a small regular army as nucleus, garrison duty, and the first line of defense," imagine that. Then for the support of the first called out, the organized militias commonly known as National Guard. Notice he said the organized militias. Then for the third line, the National Volunteer Reserve. Then comes out the Reserve Militia, which includes all able-bodied men between the ages of 18 and 45. So clearly there's a huge distinction between the National Guard and the militia. So it should now be clear to you that the Second Amendment preserves your personal, individual right to keep and bear arms. But you already know that. So why did I go through all of this to tell you that? Well, the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled recently that people do not have a right to carry concealed weapons in public under the Second Amendment. The 11-judge panel, in a 7-4 vote, essentially contradicted and overturned a 2014 ruling made by the exact same court. The panel now says that law enforcement officials can require applications for a concealed weapons permit to show they are in immediate danger or otherwise have a good reason for a permit beyond self-defense. Because that's just what you need if you're in immediate danger. Government bureaucracy. This is upholding a California law that requires gun owners to show a good reason to get a license to carry concealed. The court said, quote, "The protection of the Second Amendment, whatever the scope of that protection may be, simply does not extend to the carrying of concealed firearms in public by members of the general public." The court declined to say whether the Constitution protects openly carrying a gun in public. It said that that question was not at issue in this case. The appeals court said that it followed the U.S. Supreme Court's method of looking to history to resolve gun rights issues. Quote, "Because the Second Amendment does not protect in any degree the right to carry concealed firearms in public, any prohibition or restriction a state may choose to impose on concealed carry, including the requirement of good cause, however defined, is necessarily allowed by the amendment," the Ninth Circuit said. So what can we learn from this? As Lysander Spooner said, and I have quoted countless times on this show, quote, "But whether the Constitution really be one thing or another, this much is certain, that it has either authorized such a government as we have had, or it has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is unfit to exist." Truer words could not have been spoken. The Constitution in no way preserves or defends our basic rights, as evidenced by this ruling by a body that is intended to interpret the Constitution. If the Constitution did protect our rights, there would be no way that a body of any number of men could take away basic rights of ours, rights that are clearly laid out in the Constitution. Yet men in robes do this all the time, and not just about this one issue. Take, for example, FISA courts, which is clearly a violation of Article 3 of the Constitution. The Obamacare mandate, forcing you to purchase health insurance or be fined heavily? Constitutional. Slavery? Constitutional in this country until 1865. Clearly, the Constitution is useless when it comes to preserving basic human rights. Either that, or it allows the government to take those rights away at will. Either way, the document is not worth the paper that it is written on and should cease to exist. Now, I know this is a tough pill to swallow. I was a constitutionalist for most of my life. That is, until I found Spooner's writings. I highly recommend his writing to anybody, and it is all online for free. But if you prefer a more recent source of knowledge in this area, I cannot recommend Sheldon Richman's book, American Counter-Revolution: The Constitution Revisited, more strongly. I could never do a review of this book that would do it justice, so allow me to read an excerpt from the Amazon page about this book. Quote, "The book challenges the assumption that the Constitution was a landmark in the struggle for liberty. Instead, Sheldon Richman argues it was the product of a counter-revolution, a setback for the radicalism represented by America's break with the British Empire. Drawing on careful, credible, historical scholarship and contemporary political analysis, Richman suggests that this counter-revolution was the work of conservatives who sought a nation of power, consequence, and grandeur. America's counter-revolution makes a persuasive case that the Constitution was a victory not for liberty, but for the agendas and interests of a militaristic, aristocratic, privilege-seeking ruling class. And I've read this book, and it does that. It is a fantastic book. Do yourself a favor and buy it. America's Counter-Revolution, The Constitution Revisited by Sheldon Richman. I have a link to where you can buy it in the show notes to this episode at thelavaflow.com/39. I also have a link to Lysander Spooner's No Treason, The Constitution, No Authority, where you can read it for free on the internet. Please check both of these out.
What's in the news? The news you need to know from a libertarian perspective.
So I've got a lot of news this week, so let's just dive right into it. As you've no doubt heard, a nut job killed 49 people and injured many more at a gay club in Orlando, Florida. The left, of course, immediately came out and blamed the gun. The right naturally immediately came out and blamed Islam. Of course, as usual, both sides are wrong because neither of these are really to blame. A single, sick, crazy motherfucker is to blame. A man whose name should be forever removed from our world. A man who, by all accounts, was unstable, bipolar, an abuser of his ex-wife, and just out of his goddamned mind. According to his wife and his parents, he wasn't particularly religious, but he was raised that way, and he had been enraged after seeing two men kiss in Miami. So clearly this asshat was a bigot as well, and was likely just using the ISIS name to induce more fear in people than anything else, since there has not been found a single bit of credible evidence connecting him with any terror organization, much less ISIS, other than the rantings of a madman. He had previously claimed connections to Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda, two groups vehemently opposed to ISIS. He was no more ISIS than I am. However, there are several reports that this madman spent quite a lot of time at Pulse, the nightclub in question, getting drunk there on several occasions. There are also reports that he frequented gay chat rooms and messaged men using a gay dating app. Was he a self-hating homosexual who felt disgusted at himself because he was gay? This is certainly possible, and even more likely because of the hatred of gays by the particular religion that he was raised with. When you belong to a cult that tells you it is a sin and despicable to be gay, and you are gay, I can't imagine the struggles that your mind must go through to deal with that. I've known a couple of gay Christian men that struggled with this myself, repressing themselves and being utterly miserable for it due to their Christianity. Now, Hillary and Trump, of course, are both talking about escalating war against ISIS now, based on these rantings of a madman. Even though people in the club who were held hostage by this motherfucker for 3 hours said that his expressed reasons for this attack were to, quote, stop America from bombing his country. This is yet another example of blowback. Ron Paul talked about this years ago. This is completely consistent with almost every single Muslim terrorist who's been able to offer a reason for his or her actions. But to hell with evidence. To hell with facts. Let's use the fear and emotions of the electorate to score votes, goddammit. Let's bomb them some more. Let's send ground troops in. Let's kill mothers and fathers and children and create even more terrorists. I'm already against this next war. So today, instead of spreading more hatred, more bombs, and more death, let's remember the lives lost in this senseless act and forget the asshole, the evil bastard who was responsible for it. Let's keep the families of those lost in our hearts and remove gun-free zones, or, as I like to call them, shooting fish in a barrel zones, from the map. Allow us the ability to bring a gun to a gunfight, and I can almost guarantee there would have been a lot less dead in this situation. That's how you honor their memory. In Hold On to Your Hat news, there is some good news coming out of Washington as a White House office has deleted language in a recently introduced tobacco regulation that would have removed flavored e-cigarettes from the market until they had been authorized by the Food and Drug Administration. As we talked about on this show a few weeks ago, on May 5th, the FDA released a final rule extending its tobacco authority to include e-cigarettes, pipe tobacco, cigars, and hookah. The rule was supposed to become effective in early August. Under the rule, companies must seek marketing authorization for any tobacco product introduced after February 15, 2007, which was estimated to cost $1 million per application. A White House spokeswoman, Emily Kane, said the Office of Management and Budget, quote, does not comment on changes made during the interagency review process. The FDA also does not comment, FDA spokesman Michael Felderbaum said. But this is fantastic news. These regulations have been completely removed, and at least for now, vaping is safe, thanks to an unnamed bureaucrat in Washington. I never thought I would say those words. But this does show the capricious and arbitrary nature of these sorts of rules and regulations coming out of all levels of government these days. At least now, I personally won't have to resort to the black market. In 1984 wasn't an instruction manual news. An Electronic Frontier Foundation investigation just revealed an awfully Orwellian fact. The FBI is working with government researchers to develop advanced tattoo recognition technology. This would allow law enforcement to sort and identify people based on their tattoos to determine, quote, affiliation to gangs, subcultures, religious or ritualistic beliefs, or political ideology. Makes me want to reconsider getting some of my anarchist and liberty tattoos. The EFF reports that law enforcement wants the new technology to decipher the tattoos that, quote, contain intelligence, messages, meaning, and motivation. The tattoo research started at the National Institute for Standards and Technology in 2014, using a database of prisoners' tattoos. The technology developed by NIST would, quote, map connections between people with similarly themed tattoos or make inferences about people from their tattoos, the EFF reports. The EFF investigation also claims that the researchers disregarded basic ethical government research standards, especially ones related specifically to prisoners. According to the documents obtained, NIST researchers sought permission from supervisors only after they had conducted their initial research. They also didn't disclose the data they were using came from pictures of prisoners and arrestees. Talk about draconian and Big Brother tactics. This is scary, to say the least. Thank Rothbard that the EFF is on the case. In What the Actual Fuck news, there are now more Americans in jail, 6 million, than there were in Stalin's Gulag, reports Fareed Zakaria in a column named Incarceration Nation in Time magazine. And this is per capita. The U.S. currently has 760 prisoners per 100,000 citizens and is the most heavily incarcerated country in the world right now. How does this rate with other countries? Britain is at 153 per 100,000 compared to our 760. Japan is at 63 per 100,000. Mexico has 208 per 100,000, and Brazil has 242 per 100,000. And it's also a relatively new phenomenon. In 1980, the U.S. only had 150 prisoners per 100,000 citizens, less than 30 years ago. You can thank the war on drugs for this massive increase. More than half of America's 6 million prisoners are in jail for drug convictions, with 80% of those in jail for simple possession. In 2009 alone, 1.66 million Americans were arrested on drug charges, more than were arrested on assault or larceny charges. And 4 out of 5 of these arrests were simply for possession. I guess they have to get pictures of tattoos from somewhere, don't they? In legalized theft news, the Oklahoma Highway Patrol has taken asset forfeiture to a whole new, sickening level. Now the Oklahoma Highway Patrol has a device that also allows them to seize money on prepaid cards under asset forfeiture laws. It's called an ERAD, or Electronic Recovery and Access to Data Machine, and OHP began using 16 of these last month. Here's how it works. If a trooper suspects a person may have money tied to some type of crime, the Highway Patrol can scan and seize money from prepaid debit cards and gift cards. The device tells officers the balance of the prepaid debit cards and gift cards and allows them to seize the money if they determine it's suspicious. eRAD readers also can provide limited information about pretty much any card with a magnetic strip, including bank debit cards and credit cards. OHP stresses troopers do not do this during all traffic stops, only situations where they believe there is probable cause. How refreshing. Troopers also insist that this, and I can't say this without laughing, troopers also insist that this isn't just about seizing cash. My ass. Quote, I know that a lot of people are just going to focus on the seizing money. That's a very small thing that's happening now. The largest part that we have found, the biggest benefit has been the identity theft, OHP Lieutenant John Vincent said. Quote, if you can prove that you have a legitimate reason to have that money, it will be given back to you. And we've done that in the past, Vincent said about any money seized. Did this law enforcement officer, and I use those terms loosely, really just say that you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent? You're goddamn right he did. And of course, no one interviewing him challenged him on that. Quote, we've seen single moms' stuff be taken, a cancer survivor his drugs taken. We saw a Christian band being taken. We've seen innocent people's stuff being taken. We've seen where the money goes and how it's being misspent, State Senator Kyle Loveless said. Loveless plans to introduce legislation next session that would require a conviction before any asset could be seized. And this is a sweet deal. Not only for the OHP, but also for eRAD Group, the company that makes the devices. The state is paying around $5,000 for the software and scanners, plus about $1,500 for training, then 7.7% of all the cash forfeited through the courts to the Highway Patrol. In Some Heroes Do Wear Uniforms news, Seattle Seahawks cornerback Richard Sherman told ESPN Seattle that if he was elected to the White House, quote, I'd stop spending billions of taxpayer dollars on stadiums and probably get us out of debt and maybe make the billionaires who actually benefit from the stadiums pay for them. According to an analysis from the Public-Private Partnerships for Major League Sports Facilities, $12 billion in public funds were used for 51 new sports facilities between 2001 and 2010. $12 billion. That is insane. For example, the $430 million CenturyLink Field, the home of the Seahawks where Sherman plays, was paid for with $300 million in taxpayer money, despite the fact that team owner Paul Allen is the 45th richest man in the world. And Seattle taxpayers are on the hook for the stadium through 2021. At least some people can see the hypocrisy in that. In equality and slavery news, the U.S. Senate voted to pass a defense bill that would require young women to sign up for a potential military draft for the first time in U.S. history. This is all part of a push to equalize genders. I think a much more fair way to equalize genders in this situation would be to equally make both genders not eligible for the draft. But that's just me. However, I do think that this could have that effect eventually. When men have to begin talking to their daughters about signing up for the draft, or when mothers and daughters start coming back in more body bags, that will have such an effect on the public that I believe there will be an outcry to remove the draft entirely. We can only hope. But also in this defense spending bill was a provision that prohibits the closure of the unconstitutional and horrendous Guantanamo Bay. There was also a provision denying the Pentagon's attempt to close some military bases. This is purely political in nature, since no representative wants to close military bases in their districts that would cost jobs. The Senate and the House will now meet to compare and resolve differences between the two versions of the defense spending bill. The House version does not have the female draft requirement in it. We can only hope that it's eventually dropped, because nobody should be slaves. In government inefficiency news, a Minnesota man is suing the TSA and the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport over a missed flight. Human Nikazad claims he missed his flight in March because he was stuck in a security checkpoint line. Nikazad said that he arrived at the airport about 2 hours ahead of his scheduled departure time, but still missed his flight after standing in a security line for more than 1.5 hours. He claimed the TSA had limited staff and was only running one body scanner for passengers in the regular security line. He is suing for $506.85 to cover the cost of a new flight and other transportation fees, plus a filing fee for the lawsuit. Quote, "The defendant's failures cost me a new flight ticket and multiple transportation costs to and from the airports," the claim stated. Airport security lines have been under pressure recently thanks to record airport traffic. The increased passenger flow led to lengthy security lines, with some passengers facing 4-hour-plus waits to get cleared. The TSA has recommended passengers arrive 2 hours ahead of their flight time, but some airports have advised allowing 3 hours to get through security. What kind of bullshit is this? This is government monopoly bullshit. If a company in the free market started telling people that they needed to arrive 2 to 3 hours prior to receiving service, that company would likely go out of business because another company would open offering the same service much faster. But there is no option for that in a government monopoly situation such as the TSA. We need to end the TSA, make airlines responsible for their security again, and actually hold them responsible for what happens because of that security. I wish there were a way to calculate how much business has been lost due to people choosing other forms of transportation in order to not have to mess with the TSA. When the TSA is missing 95% of the contraband that goes through security and tests like happened last year, they are not only causing huge backups, but they're also not securing anything either. So they are useless and ineffective. In the government that is big enough news, the U.S. federal government has notified officials in Sherman County, Washington, that using the federal water supply to cultivate state legal cannabis is illegal. The U.S. Department of Interior issued a letter to Sherman County's Department of Community Development, stating the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation cannot allow the use of water from the Columbia Basin Project for the production of marijuana, because cannabis remains a federally prohibited substance. The Columbia Basin Project is an extensive irrigation network in central Washington, the largest water reclamation project in the United States. It's made possible by the Grand Coulee Dam. So much for Obama's promise to not mess with legal production of cannabis in states where it's legal. This is clearly an attempt to hurt the business of people making a legal living. The state of Washington, if they had some balls, would sue the federal government over this, instead of just bending over to help them out. In Gary Johnson news, Ron Paul has some advice for Gary Johnson. Asked by Fox Business host Kennedy on Thursday what he would recommend were he advising Libertarian presidential nominee Gary Johnson, Ron Paul replied, quote, "I would want him to be more of an outspoken champion of liberty and be crisp and clear and not make people wonder about it." Ron Paul, as you know, ran for president as the Libertarian Party nominee in 1988 before his 2008 and 2012 Republican presidential primary runs. He also discusses in this interview Johnson's often repeated self-description as a social liberal and a fiscal conservative. Quote, "I don't consider myself one half conservative and one half liberal. I think those are moderates," states Paul. Instead, Paul says that he thinks, quote, "You have to be precise on what the non-aggression principle is all about and apply it consistently, because it is such a wonderful opportunity to take that principle and apply it to economic and social issues equally." Now, I've talked about fiscally conservative and socially liberal in the past in episode 8 of The Lava Flow, which you can listen to at thelavaflow.com/8. It is just not a true statement at all, and Johnson is out there saying it literally on a daily basis. This is bad, not only for the Libertarian Party, but also for libertarianism as a whole, as it makes the left think that we want to spend a fuck ton of money on tax money on the military, while it makes the right think that we want to spend a fuck ton of money on welfare and Social Security. This is a lose-lose argument, and Johnson is hurting libertarianism every time he says it. In some personal news, the last episode of this show hit all kinds of records. I had my biggest release ever with that episode, as well as hitting over 51,000 total downloads for all of my episodes. If you had told me that I would have 51,000 downloads on the show only 17 months in, I would have laughed in your face. But here I am. Now, when this podcast releases, I'm actually sitting at the 13th annual Porcupine Freedom Festival, PorcFest. I sure hope to see you there. And if you're there, come by and see me. I'm in RV Lot 88. For those of you who can't make it to PorcFest, let me know what parts of PorcFest you are most interested in hearing about on the next episode of this show. You can contact me at Roger, RODGER, at thelavaflow.com, on Twitter at thelavaflowpod, or on Facebook at thelavaflow.com/FB. I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys on this so that I can cover the parts of PorcFest most interesting to you, my loyal listeners, and skip all the stuff that you guys don't care about. And in a final bit of absolutely crazy personal news, I have now crossed my $100 per episode threshold for support for this show. I am officially now at $102.50 per episode. And you know what that means. More content for you. So starting after PorcFest, I will begin producing The Lava Spurt, a 5 to 10 minute weekly supplemental podcast to discuss a single topic in a quick spurt of information. Think of The Lava Spurt as a weekly What's Rustling My Jimmy segment on top of what you already get from the Lava Flow every other week. My initial plans are to do at least 2 Lava Spurt episodes per month on the weeks between Lava Flow episodes. My goal, though, will be to try and do a Lava Spurt every week, even on the weeks that I have a Lava Flow. But that's probably not going to happen every week. Wish me luck. And a special thank you to all of my supporters who made this happen. You guys are the best. Thank you. My next level is set at $250 per episode. Now, what do you get for that level? Right now, my half-hour Lava Flow is only once every 2 weeks. Once I hit $250 per episode, I will be bringing you a half hour of the Lava Flow every week, on top of the Lava Spurt episodes that you'll be getting. Same great content, same great segments, same great Jimmy wrestling. Only twice as much. Help support the show today at thelavaflow.com/support to help me get to that level.
Ancap Apps.
There's a new Bitcoin wallet out for both iPhone and Android devices that you will want to check out. It's called the Jaxx wallet, JAXX, and you can get it in the Google and the Apple app stores. It's also available on Chrome, Firefox, PCs, Mac, and Linux desktops. There are a lot of cool benefits to this wallet that make it very attractive. First, it doesn't require you to add any personal details at all to open a wallet, giving you some privacy and anonymity. That's always nice to see in a wallet. Also, the Jaxx server itself doesn't access or hold any of your funds. It's all done in the wallet and separated from their eyes completely. The security is also all client-side, so the private keys are never sent to any servers and they're hosted locally. This is a huge security bonus. You can also easily sync your funds among devices or between mobile devices and desktop devices. And one of the coolest features of this wallet is that it's a multi-coin wallet, similar to Coinomi that we talked about a few months ago, but Coinomi is still only available on Android. The Jaxx wallet allows you to store Bitcoin, Ethereum, and DAO tokens on any of the devices that I mentioned earlier. And in the latest update for Jaxx, they are now integrating with Shapeshift in the app that allows you to move funds between Bitcoin, Ethereum, and DAO without any hassle. This new update with Shapeshift is not available on the iPhone yet, but it should be any day now, and now may already be out by the time you hear this episode. This is a very easy wallet to use, and it's super secure. I would highly recommend this to anybody, and I certainly think that you should check it out if you're into cryptocurrency at all. The only thing this app is missing to make it perfect for me personally would be for them to add Dash currency as well. I'm holding out hope that this will happen soon. For all the information on the wallet and to download it on any of the available platforms, go to jaxx.io. It's jaxx.io and check it out. Thank you for listening to the show this week. As always, I need to thank my favorite van driver, Jessica, for her help with this show. For the show notes to this episode, where I put links and other information that's been on this show, go to thelavaflow.com/39. I have no new iTunes reviews this week for the second episode in a row. I think that's a first for me. If you get a few minutes this week, I sure would appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and a review. iTunes steers people to this podcast based on the number of subscribers and the number of positive reviews. So every positive review that you give me helps get the show in front of more people. Go to thelavaflow.com/iTunes today to give me a rating and a review. And thanks to the 54 of you who have left me a rating and the 45 who've left me a review. Thanks so much. And like I mentioned a few minutes ago, I have 2 new supporters for the show and 3 supporters who've increased their support. First, Vignesh is a new supporter at $2 per episode using Patreon. Thank you so much, Vignesh, for your support. And former LP presidential candidate Daryl W. Perry started a $5 per episode donation to help bring me over the top. As a matter of fact, at a meeting when I told Daryl that I only needed $3.50 to get to my $100, he started his donation because he wants more content. Thank you so much, Daryl. Drew increased his $2.50 per episode support to $3.50 per episode. Thank you so much, Drew. I appreciate your continued support. Also, longtime donor Trevor increased his support from $2.50 per episode to $5 per episode. Trevor, thank you so much. And last, but certainly not least, Carl has increased his support for the second time. Carl started off as one of my very first donors at $10 per episode, then increased to $15 a few months ago. He's now increased to $20 per episode using Bitcoin. He had this to say on Facebook, quote, "Glad to hear that you're staying with the state party of principle." He's talking about the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. "Here's an increase in my donation for the podcast of principle." Thank you so much, Carl. It is so much appreciated. As I said, I am now at $102.50 per episode. Are you kidding me right now? I am speechless. My wife, Jess, and I were talking about this just a couple of days ago. When I started this, I intentionally set the bar pretty high at $100 for the first level because I didn't think I'd ever reach it, or at least not for many years. Now I'm there. I did it in 17 months, thanks to you guys, and I'm just dumbfounded. I cannot thank Vignesh, Daryl, Trevor, Drew, and Carl, and all of my other donors enough. If you want more of the Lava Flow, just like all of my supporters, and to keep this show ad-free, exercise your free market muscles by going to thelavaflow.com/support and giving a per-episode donation of as little as $1 an episode using Federal Reserve notes through Patreon or Bitcoin through Coinbase. There are monthly costs associated with doing this show, and I need additional equipment to continue making this show better for you every single episode. Until next time, keep striking the root.
Thank you for listening to The Lava Flow at thelavaflow.com. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now at thelavaflow.com/subscribe. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.